class! In this second video update for the week, I wanted to chat with you about what an ideal performance management system looks like. We like to see 15 specific characteristics in an ideal system. Now, that includes being both strategic and contextually congruent, thorough, practical, meaningful, and specific. It should identify effective and ineffective performance. It should be reliable and valid, acceptable and fair, inclusive and open. It should be correctable, standardized, and ethical. Now let's get into the details of each of these. Now, when I say strategically congruent, it should be consistent with the organization's strategy. It should also be aligned with the unit or department, as well as the organizational goals. Contextually congruent is when it is consistent with the organization's culture, as well as the broader cultural context of the country or the region. So, for example, for 360-degree feedback, it won't be effective if there is not open communication or any hierarchies that are very rigid. So 360s are a much more open type of performance feedback. So we want to make sure that goes with the culture of the company as well. Another characteristic is for it to be thorough. And when I say thorough, it needs to include all employees need to be evaluated, not just a select amount of employees. It needs to touch on all major job responsibilities. An evaluation should cover the entire performance review period. So as we talked about in the discussion board, and most of you guys are saying you see it annually, which is the most common, we have what's called a recency effect, where we only think back to the what's most recent, the last month or two. But it's important for the review to cover the whole year. So we want to make sure it's thorough. And feedback needs to be given on both positive and negative performance, not just the negative side and not just the positive side, but it needs to balance both. It needs to be a true reflection. Another characteristic is it must be practical. So it needs to be not only available, but also easy to use. It should be acceptable to decision makers, and the benefits should outweigh the costs. It should be meaningful. Standards are important and relevant. System measures only what the employee can control. We don't want to measure something that's out of control by the employee. It's not fair to hold them accountable for that. Results must have consequences. There's been a lot of talk about accountability in the discussion board this week. So we want to make sure that there's accountability and consequences for those results. Evaluations occur regularly and appropriate times, and the system must provide for continuing skill development of its evaluators. So we want to make sure the evaluators know exactly what they're doing. An ideal performance management system should be specific. It should be concrete, detailed guidance to the employees. They should know what is expected of them and how to meet those expectations. Next, it needs to identify effective and ineffective performance. So it needs to distinguish the difference between that, both in behaviors and in the results. It needs to provide the ability to identify employees with various levels of performance. Reliability and validity are also essential in that perfect performance management system. Now, reliability refers to it being consistent. It's free of error, and there's a high inter-rater reliability. Validity measures what is relevant. It measures what is important. It doesn't measure unimportant facets of the job. It's also not containmented. So it only measures what the employee can control, like I mentioned earlier. We want to make sure that the system is acceptable and fair. We want a perception of distributive justice. That is, the work performed is what the evaluation is received on, and then a reward is tied to that. There also needs to be a perception of procedural justice. And this is fairness of the procedures that are used for this system. This includes determining the ratings as well as linking those ratings to the rewards. Next is we want it to be inclusive. It needs to represent concerns of all involved. When a system is created, employees should help with deciding what should be measured and how it should be measured. Employees should also provide input on performance prior to the evaluation meeting. We see that very often in a self-assessment. So most companies, or a lot of companies, have the employees do a self-assessment, and then the manager does an assessment, and then they compare, they discuss any differences. So that can be very beneficial. It helps the employees reflect on their performance as well. Another characteristic is that it must be open, no secrets. We want it to be frequent, ongoing evaluations and feedback. There's two-way communications in an appraisal meeting. That example I mentioned a minute ago with the self-appraisals and the manager's appraisal, that's a great example of that. Talking about those differences and going back and forth. I've actually had a manager change my performance appraisal based on my feedback and my personal thoughts on the matter. So from a employee perspective as well as the manager perspective, you can get good results out of that. We want to make sure that there's clear standards and ongoing communication, and communications are factual, open, and honest. We're seeing a huge trend right now for transparency. Employees want to know what's going on. They want people to be honest and open, and this is a great example of that. Next, we want the system to be correctable. So it needs to recognize that human judgment is fallible. There needs to be appeals process provided. It should be standardized. So ongoing training of managers to be provided. We want to be consistent with evaluations across both people and time. And last but not least, it should be ethical. Supervisors suppress their self-interest. They need to be there for the improvement and development of the staff, of their employees. The supervisor rates only where he or she has sufficient information about the performance dimension. So if you have a supervisor who knows nothing about the performance that's being done, they might not be the best person to do that evaluation of that particular responsibility. And the supervisors must respect the employee's privacy. So in summary, the ideal performance management system consists of 15 characteristics: strategically congruent, contextually congruent, thorough, practical, meaningful, specific, identifies effective and ineffective performance, reliable, valid, acceptable and fair, inclusive, open, correctable, standardized, and ethical. Thank you and have a great day.